I'm Aaron Baker from PhoneDog.com, and it's time for another versus battle today, the Galaxy S4 Mini versus the Galaxy S3. Two of Samsung's Galaxy S devices, one featuring the newer design, one featuring the HD display, and subsidized prices on the US carriers. Which one should you get? Let's take a look in the versus battle. It's time for another versus battle, which is essentially a condensed dogfight where we take two phones on the market, pit them together, and tell you the pros and the cons of both. One over here, the Galaxy S3. The one over here, the Samsung Galaxy S4 Mini. And as I talked about in my Galaxy S4 Mini review, I was kind of frustrated. I was like, this thing is really expensive. There's no reason for anybody in the US to really buy this because you can get this for so cheap, subsidized on a carrier, and even unlocked, it's not as pricey in most cases as the Galaxy S4 Mini. So specs-wise, let's give it a rundown. Over here, you've got a 1.5 gigahertz dual-core Snapdragon S4 CPU. You've got 2 gigabytes of RAM, a 4.8-inch 720p Super AMOLED display here, so an HD display, 8-megapixel camera on the back with 1080p HD recording, a 2,100 milliamp hour battery. This is the AT&T version, which you can tell by the red, obviously, which at least to date has been an AT&T exclusive in the US. 4G LTE connectivity on AT&T. And then, of course, like I said, 2 gigabytes of RAM over here. Galaxy S4 Mini, rundown of the specifications. In addition to 1.5 gigabytes of RAM, you've got a 1.7 gigahertz dual-core processor. It's a Snapdragon 400 CPU, so newer CPU, less RAM, 1.5 gigabytes, smaller display, 4.3-inch QHD Super AMOLED display, so 540 by 960 pixels over here, and compare that to this one over here, 720 by 1280. 8-megapixel camera on the back as well with a 1080p HD video recording capability, 1,900 milliamp hour battery, Android 4.2. So I should point out, this is running Android 4.1 with TouchWiz, this is running Android 4.2 with TouchWiz. But the overall look and feel is very similar here, design similar across the board. You know how it looks, volume rocker, power buttons in the same place on the right side over here, and then you've got your 3.5 millimeter headphone jack up top and your micro USB charging ports down at the bottom. So size-wise, just to compare them so you can see what they look like, the Galaxy S4 is in very much every essence a mini device. The S4 Mini is small. It compares to something like the Apple iPhone 5 or something of that nature in terms of size. The Galaxy S3 is a little bit of a larger device all around. It's got that pebble look and feel as we've talked about extensively in Galaxy S3 videos, but the overall look and feel of these devices very similar all across the board. You can see the shortcuts up top, but you can tell because this one is running Android 4.1, you don't get the ability to edit stuff over here like you do with this one, which is running Android 4.2. So I can customize those lock screen settings around, and when I want to go into settings, I can go in. Just to show you some of the differences here, it's not tabbed out over on the Galaxy S4 Mini like it is on the Galaxy S3. The real differences here reside obviously in the specifications and the screen size as well. Compare it to something you would take a picture of, for example, and both of these have 8-megapixel cameras. So I just take the same picture so you can see. And we'll do it of the HTC One, the black HTC One over here. And we'll take a quick picture with both just so you can see what it looks like. Boom. There. And we'll do it over here as well. Get the focus in there. Oh, it's not one to, there we go, boom. And so you've got on both of these 8-megapixel shooters, but I want to show you what they look like when you're in full screen mode, just to give you an idea here. Screen rotation on of what it looks like having a bigger display versus a smaller display. So 4.3 versus 4.8, it may not sound like a lot, but you can really tell the difference in day-to-day use. There you go. Get in on the HTC logo so you can see that. And you can see the size difference between these two displays. I'll move that up so you can take a look. So there is a difference there. You get a couple of obvious things to take into consideration here. First of all, the Galaxy S4 Mini looks newer than the Galaxy S3. It's got the design language of the Galaxy S4, so you can see in terms of the look and feel with the black mist color, all the way to the edges and the sides that are just a little bit thicker looking, but are actually in most cases thinner than the Galaxy S3 products. It's got everything that looks like a Galaxy S4, or a member of the Galaxy S4 family. Galaxy S3 does look a little bit dated. It's been around for a while, so that's something that bothers you. That'll be a factor to consider in this whole pros and cons battle between these two devices. But we'll go into quadrant standard here and take a look, and we'll talk about AT&T and the carriers versus buying something unlocked just after that, and that will round out our battle between these two. Quadrant standard loading up on both units, and I'll flip these so we can take a look here at what they look like. Run the benchmark. We'll run it over here as well. Battery life about the same on both of these units. You've got an HD display over here, so even though it's got a bigger 2,100 milliamp hour battery, the overall battery life is about the same. I get about 11 hours of moderate use on the Galaxy S3 and 13 to 14 if I'm really light on the use versus what I typically do with my device. Over here, 1,900 milliamp hour battery, and with a quadrant, or excuse me, with a quadrant standard, with a QHD display, clearly a play on words there, 4.3-inch QHD display, make it about the same amount of time on this device, and both charge pretty quickly. You can see the overall design language looks very similar to menu button, menu and back over here, and then two home buttons, both of which are physical down there at the bottom. So quadrant standard loading up on both of these units, and we'll see which one's faster because this one has a 1.7 gigahertz dual-core CPU that's actually newer, the chipset's newer, and then over here this one has the 1.5 gigahertz dual-core Snapdragon S4 Pro CPU. So or plus CPU, excuse me. And so, you know, it's a little bit slower, a little bit older. So we'll see how it plays out. And then if the 2 gigabytes of RAM matters more, maybe it does, versus the 1.5 gigabytes over here. Another thing to take note of, 16 gigabytes on most of the carrier variants in the States. This only has 8 gigabytes on the version that I purchased from Negri Electronics, which retails for about $560. So be sure to take a look at that if you're deciding storage-wise which one to buy. 7,098 over here, 5,747. Take it with a grain of salt. These aren't always indicative of day-to-day performance. They're both very fast devices all around. I haven't had any lag with either one of these, so to speak, but this one is a little bit faster despite only having 1.5 gigabytes of RAM. So like anything, it's a tough battle, and I'll tell you the way I think of it is this. If you're in the US, you're on AT&T, Sprint, Verizon, or T-Mobile, it's a better value play to go with the Galaxy S3. So the Galaxy S3 wins the versus battle. This one is newer, the processor's newer, but it misses out on a lot. It misses out on the HD display, it misses out on a slightly larger battery, and then it misses out on other cool features like 2 gigabytes of RAM, and then at least in the States, availability subsidized on carriers. You can get this anywhere from free to $99 depending on your carrier. Over here, if you want to buy this, you can buy it. You can buy it unlocked at Negri Electronics and bring it in, but the cost is expensive and prohibitive for a lot of people, $550 to $600. Keep it locked on the site for continuing coverage. I'm on Twitter at phonedog_Aaron. Let me know what you think of this versus battle. Facebook as well, facebook.com/HiAaronBaker. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.